The silence in my apartment had a weight to it, a physical presence that settled in the corners and gathered dust. It was a comfortable silence, the kind I had curated over years of deliberate solitude. But comfortable did not always mean welcome. Some days, like today, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. From my window, the one that overlooked the shared patch of lawn separating my duplex from the one opposite, I had an unobstructed view of Liam renovating his life. He had moved in 6 months ago, a whirlwind of loud music, the scent of sawdust, and the kind of easy, unself-conscious energy that I both envied and found intimidating. He was, for lack of a better word, a spectacle, and I was a dedicated spectator. My life was a series of quiet routines. Wake, coffee, work from home, lunch, more work, microwave dinner, streaming service, sleep. It was a loop, a flat circle of muted existence. Liam's life was a cacophony of vibrant, unpredictable noise. He wrestled with overgrown rose bushes, built a ridiculously oversized barbecue pit, and had friends over whose laughter echoed across the lawn late into the summer nights. He was everything I was not: loud, social, and from all available evidence, devastatingly straight. I had seen him on his porch with a woman once or twice, her laughter bright and tinkling, a perfect counterpoint to his low rumble. The sightings were infrequent, but they were enough to cement the fact in my mind. He lived in a world I could only watch. He had a dog, a golden retriever mix named Buster, who was a furry, four-legged agent of chaos. Buster was Liam's shadow, a clumsy, oversized puppy who seemed to believe the entire neighborhood was his personal playground. I often watched them from my window, a painful little diorama of the life I thought I wanted. Liam would throw a tennis ball, his bicep flexing under the thin cotton of his t-shirt, and Buster would bound after it with an enthusiasm that seemed impossible to contain. They were a unit, a perfect picture of suburban contentment. My contentment, on the other hand, was a carefully constructed facade. I told myself I preferred the quiet. I told myself I didn't need the complication of other people. But my gaze always drifted back to the window, to the man with sun-streaked brown hair and a smile that could coax flowers from concrete. I had cataloged everything about him, every small detail in addict hordes. The way he chewed on his lower lip when he was concentrating on a task. The faded university logo on his favorite gray sweatshirt. The low, patient tone he used when he spoke to Buster. It was a pathetic, one-sided intimacy, and I was its sole, lonely participant. The day it happened started like any other. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. I was standing in my kitchen, waiting for the microwave to signal the completion of another joyless meal, when a flash of gold streaked across my peripheral vision. It was Buster, moving at a speed that suggested pure, unadulterated freedom. A moment later, Liam appeared, jogging down his porch steps, a useless leash dangling from his hand. He shouted the dog's name, a note of exasperated fondness in his voice that was achingly familiar to me. "Buster, get back here, you furry menace." Buster, of course, paid him no mind. The dog was on a mission, his nose to the ground, his tail a triumphant banner. He zigzagged across the lawn, a furry missile aimed directly at Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias. I felt a jolt, a sudden, unwelcome urge to get involved. My default setting was non-interference. I was a ghost in this neighborhood, a quiet observer. But something in the frantic energy of the moment, in the sheer panic on Liam's face as he pictured the floral carnage to come, pushed me out of my inertia. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was out my own front door. The cool evening air was a shock against my skin. I grabbed the half-eaten bag of beef jerky I kept on my counter for moments of profound laziness, a snack that doubled as an emergency protein source. It felt ridiculous, but it was all I had. Buster, upon seeing a new player enter the game, immediately changed course. He bounded towards me, his tongue lolling out of his mouth, his eyes wide with goofy delight. I knelt, holding out a piece of the jerky. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice feeling rusty from disuse. "Look what I've got." Buster skidded to a halt in front of me, his paws tearing up a small patch of my already struggling lawn. He sniffed the jerky, then looked at me, then back at the jerky, as if weighing the options of delicious snack versus continued chaotic freedom. The snack won. He gently took the offering from my fingers, his wet nose bumping against my palm. I took the opportunity to grab his collar, the worn leather a solid anchor in my hand. Liam jogged over, breathing a little heavily. He was wearing that gray sweatshirt, a smudge of what looked like paint on his cheek. His hair was a mess, falling into his eyes. He looked incredible. My heart did a stupid little stutter in my chest. "Man, thank you," he said, offering a breathless, grateful smile. That smile. It was even more potent up close. He slipped his collar right as I was trying to hook the leash. He's a little escape artist. "No problem." I managed, my throat suddenly dry. "He seems friendly." I gave Buster's head a scratch. The dog leaned into my touch, his tail thumping a happy rhythm against the ground. For a moment, it was just the three of us in the fading light, the scent of cut grass and Liam's faint, woodsy cologne filling the small space between us. It felt domestic. The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. Liam held out his hand for the collar, but I was already unclipping the leash from his belt loop where he'd hooked it. I deftly clipped it onto Buster's collar, a simple mechanical action that my fumbling fingers almost betrayed. I stood up, holding the looped end of the leash out to him. This was it. The transaction was complete. I could retreat back into my silent apartment and spend the rest of the night overanalyzing every second of the 3-minute interaction. But Liam didn't take the leash. Not at first. He just looked at me, his gaze steady and unreadable. His eyes were a hazel color that seemed to shift in the twilight, sometimes green, sometimes brown. I felt pinned by that look, my own carefully constructed walls feeling suddenly flimsy. He reached out, his hand moving past the leash I was offering. His fingers, warm and slightly calloused, closed over my own. My hand was still holding the leash, and his hand simply enveloped it. My breath caught. My entire nervous system went on high alert. This was not part of the standard neighborly protocol. This was uncharted territory. His thumb brushed against my knuckles, a fleeting, feather-light touch that sent a spark all the way up my arm. Then, his fingers did something extraordinary. They shifted, weaving between my own, lacing our hands together around the worn nylon of the leash. It was a slow, deliberate movement. Not accidental. Not a clumsy grab. It was an intentional intertwining, a physical connection so unexpected it felt like a dream. My mind went completely blank. All my carefully rehearsed scripts for social interaction vanished. His voice was low, softer than before, when he finally spoke. It seemed to vibrate through our joined hands. "Walk with me." It wasn't a question. It was a quiet command, an invitation that felt more like a plea. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Just us. His hand holding mine. The dog panting happily beside us. The world seemed to shrink until it was only this small, impossible moment. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I just nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion. I couldn't have said no if I wanted to. I couldn't have pulled my hand away if the world depended on it. His grip tightened slightly, a silent confirmation. And just like that, he started walking, gently tugging me along with him, away from the safety of my front door and into the deepening twilight. We were walking, together, holding hands, and I had no idea what any of it meant. The first few minutes of the walk were a study in sensory overload and profound internal panic. My hand, trapped in his, felt both foreign and like it had finally found its proper place. His skin was warm against mine, a stark contrast to the cooling evening air. I could feel the faint, rhythmic pulse in his wrist, a steady beat that seemed to be counting down to some unknown event. I was acutely aware of every detail. The rough texture of his calluses against my softer palm, the way his thumb rested on the back of my hand, the slight pressure as he guided us down the sidewalk. My mind, usually a chaotic mess of anxieties, was startlingly focused on this single point of contact. Buster trotted ahead of us, his tail wagging, completely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding at the other end of his leash. He was the perfect excuse, the perfect buffer. Without the dog, this would be something else entirely. A date? A proposition? With the dog, it was just two neighbors walking a dog. Two neighbors who happened to be holding hands with the intimacy of lifelong lovers. My internal sarcasm kicked in, a desperate defense mechanism. Right. Perfectly normal neighborly behavior. I should start holding Mrs. Henderson's hand when I help her with her groceries. Liam was silent, his profile outlined against the streetlights that were beginning to flicker on. He seemed completely at ease, as if holding another man's hand was the most natural thing in the world. Was it? Maybe this was something straight guys did. A new form of platonic bonding I had missed while I was busy being a recluse. The thought was absurd, but my brain latched onto it. A drowning man grabbing for a piece of driftwood. It was a less terrifying alternative than the other possibility, that this meant exactly what it felt like it meant. I tried to focus on my surroundings, to ground myself in reality. The familiar drone of cicadas, the distant laughter of children playing, the smell of jasmine from someone's overgrown hedge. But it was all just background noise. The main event was the warmth spreading from my hand up my arm, a slow, creeping heat that settled deep in my chest. I risked a glance at him. His jaw was set, but not in a tense way. He looked thoughtful, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. The smudge of paint was still on his cheek, and I had a sudden, insane urge to reach up with my free hand and wipe it away. I clenched my fist at my side, my nails digging into my palm. "He's a handful," Liam said, breaking the silence. His voice was a low rumble that didn't seem to disturb the quiet air around us. It felt like it was intended only for me. "He seems to have a lot of energy," I replied, proud that my voice came out as a relatively steady sound and not the squeak I had anticipated. "That's one word for it," he chuckled. The sound was warm, genuine. It vibrated through our joined hands. "The vet says he needs at least 2 long walks a day, or he'll start eating the furniture." Again, I found myself smiling. What was the first victim? A very comfortable, very expensive armchair. He chewed one of the legs clean off. It looked like a cartoon beaver had gotten to it. He shook his head, a wry grin playing on his lips. "My ex-girlfriend, Sarah, she bought it." She was not pleased. He said it casually, the mention of an ex-girlfriend a conversational grenade tossed lightly into my lap. There it is, my brain supplied helpfully. The confirmation. The reminder. This is just a weird, friendly gesture. He's straight. He's just tactile. The warmth in my chest cooled slightly, replaced by the familiar ache of disappointment. And yet, his fingers were still laced with mine. His thumb began to move, a slow, absent-minded circle on the back of my hand. My mind scrambled to reconcile the conflicting signals. The ex-girlfriend versus the thumb. The casual conversation versus the intimate gesture. It was a paradox that I couldn't solve. We walked past the small neighborhood park, the swings creaking gently in the breeze. A couple sat on a bench, their heads close together. I felt a pang of something sharp and lonely, and I instinctively looked away, back at Liam. He was watching me. Not the path, not the dog. Me. His hazel eyes were dark in the low light, his expression impossible to read. The moment my eyes met his, he didn't look away. He held my gaze, and the world seemed to stop for a second. The air thickened. His thumb stopped its circling. "What is happening?" The question screamed in my head. He gave our joined hands a small, almost imperceptible squeeze, and then looked forward again, as if the moment had never happened. But it had. I had felt it. It was a jolt, a silent communication that I couldn't decipher but felt in my bones. It wasn't just friendly. It wasn't just tactile. It was something more, something deliberate. We continued our circuit of the neighborhood, the silence returning, but it felt different now. It was heavier, charged with unspoken questions. I was no longer just a spectator to Liam's life. I had been pulled onto the stage, handed a script I didn't know, and the spotlight was blinding. I spent the rest of the walk in a state of heightened awareness, my entire being focused on the man beside me. I watched the way the muscles in his forearms tensed when Buster pulled on the leash. I listened to the soft sound of his breathing, a steady rhythm next to my own frantic, shallow breaths. I tried to analyze his every move, searching for clues. Was he lonely? Was he just reaching out for any human connection after a breakup? Was I just a convenient neighbor, a warm body to fill the silence on an evening walk? The theories were endless, each one more depressing than the last. But none of them could fully explain the feeling of his thumb stroking my skin, a gesture so tender and deliberate it made my heart ache. As we rounded the corner back onto our street, the familiar sight of our duplexes came into view. A sense of dread began to pool in my stomach. The walk was ending. This strange, fragile bubble of intimacy was about to pop. He would take his leash, say goodnight, and retreat into his world, leaving me to retreat into mine. The connection would be severed, and I would be left alone with the phantom sensation of his hand in mine. I would be back at my window, watching. We stopped at the edge of his lawn, the grass damp with evening dew. Buster immediately flopped onto the ground, panting dramatically. The moment of truth had arrived. Liam turned to face me, and he still hadn't let go of my hand. If anything, his grip seemed to tighten, as if he, too, was reluctant to end the moment. "Thanks again, Alex," he said, his voice soft. He knew my name. I was momentarily stunned. I didn't think he even knew my name. I'd just been the quiet guy across the lawn. It was nothing," I stammered, feeling my face flush. He smiled, a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It wasn't nothing. You saved my Petunia's respecting reputation with Mrs. Henderson." He paused, his gaze dropping to our intertwined hands. He looked at them for a long moment, as if seeing them for the first time. I held my breath. This was it. The awkward laugh, the hasty retreat. He would pull his hand away now. But he didn't. He gently untangled his fingers from the leash, leaving it in my hand, but he didn't let go of me. His hand, now free, slid to my wrist, his thumb finding the frantic pulse there. He held me there, his touch a brand on my skin, his eyes searching my face for something. I had no idea what he wanted, what he was looking for. I could only stand there, completely vulnerable, my heart thudding a frantic message against his thumb. He started, then stopped. He licked his lips, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The confident, easygoing neighbor was gone, replaced by someone who looked just as confused as I felt. "Do you want to come in for a beer? Or something?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with potential. An invitation. A continuation. A step across a threshold I had only ever looked at from a distance. My mind screamed 1,000 different warnings. It's a trap. It's pity. He's just being nice. But my heart, that stupid, hopeful traitor, whispered something else entirely. It whispered yes. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word a small puff of air in the vast, silent night. A wave of visible relief washed over his face. His shoulders relaxed, and a genuine smile, the kind I'd only ever seen from my window, lit up his features. "Yeah?" he asked, as if needing to hear it again. "Yeah," I confirmed, a little stronger this time. He finally let go of my wrist, and the loss of contact was immediate and sharp. The air on my skin felt cold. He took the leash from my other hand, his fingers brushing mine one last time. "Come on," he said, his voice back to its usual easygoing tone, but I had seen the crack in the facade. I had felt it. He turned and led the way up his porch steps, leaving me to follow the echo of his touch and the bewildering hope that was beginning to bloom in the barren landscape of my chest. Walking into Liam's house was like walking into another world. My apartment was a testament to minimalism and emotional distance, neutral colors, sparse furniture, nothing out of place. His was a chaotic symphony of life being lived. A pair of muddy boots was kicked off by the door, a stack of mail teetered on a side table, and the air smelled of sawdust, dog, and brewing coffee. It was messy and real and incredibly inviting. In the corner, the infamous armchair sat with one leg propped up on a stack of books, a monument to Buster's destructive tendencies. "Don't mind the mess," Liam said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I'm in a permanent state of in progress." "It looks lived in," I said, and I meant it as a compliment. It felt warm. It felt like a home. He led me into the kitchen, which was dominated by a large, rustic wooden table. He gestured for me to sit while he went to the fridge. Buster, after a long drink from his water bowl, collapsed onto a dog bed in the corner with a contented sigh. The sudden domesticity of it all was jarring. 20 minutes ago, I had been in my sterile kitchen, contemplating another lonely meal. Now I was sitting at my neighbor's table, the neighbor whose hand I had just held for 27 minutes. I had counted, while his dog snored softly nearby. Liam returned with 2 bottles of beer, beads of condensation trickling down the dark glass. He set one in front of me and twisted the cap off his own before leaning against the counter opposite the table. He didn't sit down, and the distance he created felt intentional. The easy intimacy of the walk had dissipated, replaced by a new, more awkward tension. We were in a confined space now, without the distraction of a walking dog or passing scenery. It was just us. and the silence was suddenly very loud. I took a long swallow of my beer, the cold liquid a welcome shock to my system. I needed to say something, to fill the void. "So you're renovating?" I asked, gesturing vaguely around the room. It was the most boring, generic question I could have come up with. He nodded, seeming grateful for the conversational lifeline. "Yeah, this place was a wreck when I bought it. The previous owner had a thing for floral wallpaper and shag carpeting. It was like a time capsule from a very ugly decade." He took a drink of his beer, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm almost done with the kitchen. The bathroom is next. That's a horror show I'm not looking forward to." "You're doing it all yourself?" I asked, genuinely impressed. The most I had ever built was an IKEA bookshelf, and it had almost ended in tears. "Most of it," he said. "My dad taught me the basics. It's slow going, but it's satisfying." Making a place your own, he looked at me then, a directness in his gaze that made me feel like he was seeing more than just the quiet guy from next door. "What about you? You've been here longer than me. You like the neighborhood?" The question was simple, but it felt loaded. He was trying to get to know me. He was asking about my life, my opinions. People didn't usually ask. I was good at being invisible. "It's quiet," I said, which was true. "I work from home, so quiet is good." "What do you do?" he pressed, his curiosity seeming genuine. "I'm a medical transcriptionist," I said. The job was as anonymous as I was. I listened to the disembodied voices of doctors and turned their words into text. It was a life of secondhand stories, of being adjacent to drama and pain and life without ever having to participate in it. "Huh." He tilted his head, considering this. "So you spend all day listening to other people's problems." "Something like that," I admitted. He was quiet for a moment, just watching me over the rim of his bottle. The air was thick with things unsaid. The hand-holding incident hovered between us, a ghost in the room that neither of us was acknowledging. I felt a desperate need to understand it, to categorize it, to put it in a box so I could stop my mind from circling it endlessly. But how could I ask? "Hey, so, about that thing where you laced your fingers with mine like we were in a romantic comedy, what was that?" As if he could read my mind, he pushed off the counter and walked over to the table. He didn't sit in the chair opposite me, but the one right next to me. The proximity was sudden, startling. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the faint scent of his cologne more clearly now. It was a clean, spicy scent, like cedar and rain. My senses felt heightened, every detail magnified. He set his beer on the table and turned in his chair to face me more directly. "Alex," he said, his voice lower now, more serious. "Can I ask you something?" My heart rate kicked up a notch. "Sure." He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. There was that vulnerability again, the crack in the confident exterior. The walk. "I'm sorry if that was weird. Holding your hand." Here it was. The apology. The retraction. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking. I'm just a friendly guy. My stomach twisted in anticipation of the blow. "It's fine," I said, my voice flat, trying to project an indifference I was nowhere near feeling. "No, he sighed, frustrated. He ran a hand over his face. "It wasn't weird to me, but I realized it might have been unexpected. For you." Unexpected was the understatement of the century. I was surprised, I admitted, choosing my words carefully. "Right," he nodded, looking out the window into the darkness. "Look, I'm not good at this stuff." Talking, he turned back to me, his eyes earnest and intense. "I've been separated from Sarah for almost a year. We were together since college. It's all I've ever known." I just listened, my own beer forgotten. This was a confession, a glimpse behind the curtain. I felt like I should be taking notes. And this whole time, living here, I've been trying to figure out what I actually want. Not what I was supposed to want, or what she wanted, or what my parents wanted. Just me. He paused, and his gaze was so direct it felt like a physical touch. "And I'd see you, sitting on your porch reading, or working in that little garden you've got. You're always so calm, contained. And I wanted to know what was going on in your head." My breath hitched. He had been watching me. The observation had been mutual. The one-sided intimacy was not one-sided at all. The entire foundation of my understanding of our dynamic crumbled in an instant. He wasn't just the object of my secret fascination, I was the object of his. "I don't know what I'm doing, Alex," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But when Buster got loose, and you came out, it felt like an opportunity. And I just acted. Holding your hand, it felt right. It just felt simple and right. My mind was reeling. He was saying everything I had been too afraid to even hope for. He wasn't retracting the gesture. He was trying to explain it. He was admitting it was intentional. He was admitting he was confused and lonely and drawn to me. It was a moment of such profound, unexpected vulnerability that it cracked open something inside me. All my fear, my carefully constructed walls of cynicism and self-protection, they all felt so useless in the face of his raw honesty. He seemed to take my silence as rejection. A flicker of hurt crossed his face, and he started to pull back. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That's too much. I shouldn't have." "No," I interrupted, the word coming out louder than I intended. He stopped, looking at me, surprised. I took a breath, forcing myself to be as brave as he was being. "This is a moment," my brain screamed. "A real one. Don't let it pass." It felt right to me, too. The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifying and true. I had said it. I had admitted it. I had met his vulnerability with my own. The tension in his shoulders melted away. The relief on his face was so palpable, it was like watching the sun break through the clouds. He didn't say anything. He just reached out, his movements slow, hesitant. He didn't take my hand this time. Instead, his fingers came up to my cheek, the one he'd been looking at earlier. His thumb gently brushed away the smudge of paint that I now realized must have been on my face, not his. It was a transfer from his work clothes, perhaps when he'd first grabbed my hand. The gesture was so tender, so impossibly soft, it made my eyes burn. He held his hand there, cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my skin. His eyes searched mine, and this time, I knew what he was looking for. Permission, an invitation, and I gave it to him. I leaned into his touch, a barely perceptible movement, but it was enough. The space between us, which had been charged with awkwardness and uncertainty, was now filled with a different kind of energy. A quiet, humming anticipation. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the questions, the fear. But underneath it all, I saw the same yearning I felt every time I looked out my window at him. It was a mirror, reflecting my own lonely soul back at me. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone in my silence anymore. The days that followed were a strange dance of advance and retreat. The raw honesty of our conversation in his kitchen had cracked the world open, but neither of us seemed to know how to navigate the new landscape. The kiss that had felt so imminent, so inevitable, never happened that night. After that moment of searing, gentle contact, his thumb on my cheek, he had pulled back, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He had mumbled something about it being late, and I, too overwhelmed to do anything else, had simply agreed. I walked back to my apartment feeling like I was floating, my entire body humming with a strange new energy, but also deeply, profoundly confused. We fell into a new routine. It was a routine of proximity. He'd find excuses to talk to me. He'd be outside conveniently watering his plants when I left to get the mail. He'd ask my opinion on paint colors for his living room, holding up two swatches that looked virtually identical to me. Our conversations were light, trivial, circling the edges of the monumental thing that had happened between us without ever addressing it directly. It was maddening. It was like we were both standing on opposite sides of a chasm, having acknowledged its existence but terrified to take the first step across. The hand-holding did not repeat. Touches were small, fleeting, and maddeningly ambiguous. His hand would brush mine when he passed me a tool. His shoulder would press against mine as we looked at a faulty sprinkler head. Each instance sent a jolt through me, a fresh wave of hope and confusion. I spent my days in a state of constant analysis, replaying every word, every glance, every micro-expression. Was that a flirtatious smile, or just a friendly one? Was that a lingering look, or was he just lost in thought? My internal monologue was working overtime, a frantic detective trying to solve a case with too few clues. One Saturday, about a week after the walk, he knocked on my door. It was early, the dew still heavy on the grass. I opened it, blinking in the bright morning light, still in my pajamas. He was standing there in running shorts and a thin t-shirt, a light sheen of sweat on his brow. Buster was at his side, panting happily. "Morning," he said, a little breathlessly. "Sorry to bother you this early. Buster and I just got back from a run." "It's fine," I said, self-consciously running a hand through my bedhead. I was acutely aware of my worn-out pajama bottoms and faded t-shirt. He, of course, Looked like he'd just stepped out of a fitness magazine. I was wondering, he started, a little hesitantly. I have to go into the city to pick up some custom cabinets. It's an all-day thing. And I don't have anyone to watch this guy. He nudged Buster with his knee. Would you mind keeping an eye on him for me? It was a simple request, a neighborly favor, but it felt like more. It was an act of trust. He was asking me to care for something he loved. He was inviting me further into his life, handing me a key, however temporary, to his home. Of course, I said, maybe a little too quickly. Yeah, no problem at all. Relief washed over his face. Really? That's great. Thank you, Alex. I'll owe you big time. He handed me the spare key, its metal cool against my palm. He's all fed. Just needs to be let out every few hours. There's food in the pantry if you want to give him lunch. And his favorite squeaky toy is under the couch. He was rambling slightly, a nervous energy about him. We'll be fine, I reassured him, smiling. He smiled back, a genuine, grateful smile. I know for a second, his eyes held mine, and that familiar, charged silence fell between us. I thought he might say something more, something real. But he just cleared his throat and took a step back. Okay, well, I should go get cleaned up. I'll be gone most of the day. And with that, he was gone, jogging back to his own porch. I was left standing in my doorway, holding a key to his house, with his dog looking up at me expectantly. The day stretched before me, a blank canvas. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. Spending the day in Liam's house was a strange and deeply intimate experience. It was one thing to be invited in for a beer. It was another entirely to inhabit his space while he was gone. I felt like an archaeologist, carefully examining the artifacts of his life. I saw the book on his nightstand, a dog-eared collection of poetry. I saw the framed photo on his mantelpiece of him and an older couple who must have been his parents, all of them beaming. I saw the half-finished painting on an easel in the corner of his living room, a surprisingly beautiful abstract of a stormy sea. Each discovery was another layer peeled back, another piece of the puzzle that was Liam. He wasn't just the handsome, capable guy next door. He was a man who read poetry, who loved his parents, who painted. He had a rich, complex inner life that I was only just beginning to glimpse. And he had trusted me with it. Buster was the perfect companion, a warm, furry presence who seemed content to follow me from room to room before settling at my feet with a sigh. I worked on my laptop at his big kitchen table, the silence of the house punctuated by the soft snores of the dog and the ticking of a clock on the wall. It was a different kind of silence than the one in my own apartment. It was a peaceful silence, a lived-in silence. It wasn't lonely. Late in the afternoon, a fierce thunderstorm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised, greenish-gray, and the rain came down in sheets, lashing against the windows. The first clap of thunder was a sudden, violent crack that shook the house. Buster, who had been sleeping soundly, shot up with a yelp. He began to pace and whine, his body trembling. I tried to comfort him, petting him and speaking in a low, soothing voice, but he was terrified. He scrabbled at my legs, trying to climb into my lap, his big body a bundle of panicked energy. Another clap of thunder, this one even louder, sent him into a full-blown frenzy. He bolted, trying to hide under the kitchen table, then behind the couch, his whining escalating to a desperate bark. I didn't know what to do. I felt a surge of protectiveness for this creature, this furry extension of the man I was falling for? I couldn't let him be this scared. I remembered reading somewhere that weighted blankets could help anxious dogs. Liam didn't have a weighted blanket, but he did have a heavy quilt folded on the back of his couch. I grabbed it and followed Buster, who was now trying to cram himself into the small space behind the armchair with the chewed leg. I knelt on the floor, my heart aching for him. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered. "It's just noise." I gently draped the heavy quilt over him, creating a small, dark den. He stopped shaking almost immediately. He peeked his head out, looked at me with wide, grateful eyes, and then burrowed deeper under the blanket. I stayed there with him, my hand resting on the lump of his back, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing as it slowly returned to normal. We sat there together, a strange little pack of two, waiting out the storm. The rain was still coming down, softer now, when I heard the sound of a key in the lock. My head snapped up. Liam was home. He pushed the door open, shaking water from his jacket, and stopped dead when he saw me. I was still on the floor, huddled by the armchair, my hand on his blanket-covered dog. He took in the scene, his expression unreadable. "What, is everything okay?" "There was a thunderstorm," I explained, my voice a little hoarse. I started to get up, feeling suddenly foolish and exposed. Buster was terrified. The blanket seemed to help. Liam's face softened. He dropped his keys on the table and walked over, his wet boots silent on the wooden floor. He crouched down in front of me, bringing us eye to eye. The smell of rain and wet asphalt clung to him. "He hates thunder," Liam said quietly. "He's been like that since he was a puppy." He looked from me to the lump under the blanket and back again. A strange, soft smile touched his lips. "You're good with him." "He's a good dog," I said, feeling my cheeks grow warm under his intense gaze. We were so close, kneeling on the floor of his dimly lit living room. The sound of the rain, a gentle rhythm outside. The air between us was electric, charged with all the things we hadn't said, all the moments we had pulled back from. "Thank you, Alex," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "For taking care of him. For this," he gestured to the scene, to me on the floor with his dog. "It was nothing," I whispered, but we both knew it wasn't. His eyes searched mine, and I saw the same conflict, the same yearning as before. But this time, there was something else. A resolve. A decision. He reached out, not for my hand, not for my cheek, but for the collar of my shirt. He curled his fingers into the fabric, a firm, possessive grip. He didn't pull me closer. He just held me there, anchoring me, his knuckles pressing against my collarbone. "I'm tired of being confused," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. It was a confession and a declaration all in one. My heart was hammering, a wild, frantic beat against my ribs. This is it. The tipping point. The moment the world shifts on its axis. I could feel his breath on my face, warm and smelling faintly of coffee. I didn't move. I couldn't. I could only watch as his gaze dropped to my mouth. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp. The only sounds were the rain on the roof, Buster's soft snores, and the ragged sound of our breathing. He leaned in, slowly, deliberately, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I leaned forward, closing the small gap between us, meeting him halfway. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't a soft, hesitant kiss. It was desperate and hungry, a release of all the tension that had been building between us for weeks. It was the taste of rain and coffee and unspoken things. His grip on my shirt tightened, pulling me closer until our chests were pressed together. My hands came up to frame his face, my fingers tangling in his damp hair. It was a kiss that was asking a question, and I was answering it with every ounce of my being. Yes, this. I want this. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We rested our foreheads together, our eyes closed. His hand was still fisted in my shirt, and mine were still in his hair. I could feel the frantic thud of his heart mirroring my own. The world outside, with its rain and its thunder, had faded away. There was only this small, quiet space we had created, filled with the undeniable truth of what had just happened. "Oh," was all he said, his breath warm against my lips. It was a sound of discovery, of surprise, of dawning realization. I opened my eyes to find him already looking at me, his hazel eyes wide and dark with emotion. The confusion was gone, replaced by a startling clarity, a certainty. "Yeah," I whispered, a shaky laugh escaping me. "Oh." He let out a breath, a soft, wondering sound. A slow smile spread across his face, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He didn't need to say anything else. I didn't need to hear it. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, in the warmth of his house, with his dog sleeping peacefully beside us, I finally understood. I hadn't just been watching him. He had been waiting for me. The morning after was a study in exquisite awkwardness. I woke up in my own bed, the scent of him, rain, cedar, and something uniquely Liam, still clinging to my clothes and my skin. The kiss had been followed by another, and another after that, each one deeper and more certain than the last. We hadn't talked much. We had communicated in a different language, one of touch and breath and shared silence. He had walked me to my door, his hand warm on the small of my back, and had given me one last, soft kiss on the porch before whispering good night. Now, in the harsh light of a new day, the fear began to creep back in. The bright, sharp edges of reality had a way of slicing through the soft focus of nighttime moments. My brain, my own worst enemy, started its relentless campaign of doubt. It was a fluke, a moment of weakness brought on by a storm. He was lonely. You were convenient. I paced my small living room, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hand, my stomach a knot of anxiety. I kept glancing out the window, at his house, which looked exactly the same as it always had. Solid, quiet, and completely impenetrable. I was terrified of seeing him. What would I say? What would he say? Would he pretend it never happened? Would he give me a polite, distant smile and retreat back into his world, leaving me with the ghost of his lips on mine? The uncertainty was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. I felt the familiar urge to retreat, to pull my walls back up and hide in the safety of my solitude. It was easier to be lonely than to be heartbroken. I avoided the windows for the rest of the morning, keeping the blinds drawn. I tried to work, but the words on my screen blurred together. Every creak of my floorboards, every distant car door slam, sent a jolt of panic through me. I was a fugitive in my own home, hiding from the possibility of both connection and rejection. Around noon, there was a soft knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, standing in the middle of my living room like a startled deer. It had to be him. No one else ever knocked on my door. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, to stay perfectly still until he went away. It was the coward's way out, and it was deeply, deeply tempting. But then I thought of the look in his eyes last night. The certainty, the relief. I thought of his hand fisted in my shirt, not with aggression, but with a desperate need to hold on. He had been brave. He had taken the risk. The least I could do was answer the door. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. He was standing there, holding 2 mugs of what smelled like coffee. He was wearing a soft-looking flannel shirt, his hair still slightly damp from a shower. He looked nervous. His easy confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet vulnerability that mirrored my own. "Hi," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Hi," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. An awkward silence stretched between us. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I, made too much coffee," he said, holding one of the mugs out to me. "Thought you might want some." It was such a simple, mundane gesture. An offering of coffee, but it felt monumental. It was a bridge across the chasm of morning after anxiety. It was him, knocking on my door, seeking me out, proving my fears wrong. I took the mug, our fingers brushing. The small touch was electric, a reminder of the night before. "Thanks," I said, my voice steadier now. I stepped back, holding the door open. "Do you want to come in?" A wave of relief washed over his face, so potent it was almost comical. "Yeah, I'd like that." He followed me into my apartment, his presence immediately making the space feel smaller, warmer. He looked around, taking in my sparse, orderly surroundings. I suddenly saw it through his eyes. The gray walls, the single piece of abstract art, the neatly stacked books. It looked sterile. It looked lonely. "It's clean," he said, a small, teasing smile playing on his lips. "It's boring," I countered, and was surprised to hear myself say it out loud. I had never thought of it as boring before. I had thought of it as peaceful. But seeing him in it, a vibrant splash of color in my monochrome world, I realized it was true. We ended up in the kitchen, leaning against opposite counters, just as we had in his house that first night. But this time, the silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, expectant. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of the mug. "So," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "About last night." My stomach did a nervous flip. "Yeah. I just want to be clear," he said, setting his mug down with a soft click. He looked at me directly, his gaze unwavering. That wasn't a mistake. And it wasn't. I wasn't just lonely. The words were a balm on my frayed nerves. He was systematically dismantling every one of my fears, one by one. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he continued, his voice earnest. "About everything. About Sarah, about what I thought my life was supposed to be. And I realized I was just going through the motions. I was following a map someone else had drawn for me. When I moved here, started working on this house, being on my own, It was the first time I felt like I was actually drawing my own map. But I was still missing a direction. He pushed off the counter and took a step closer to me, closing the distance between us. "And then I started noticing you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "The quiet guy next door? And I was drawn to you." I didn't understand it at first. It was confusing. It didn't fit with the old map. So I just watched. And the more I watched, the more I wanted to cross the lawn. He was standing in front of me now, so close I could feel the heat coming off his body. He reached out and took my free hand, his fingers lacing with mine. It felt just as electric, just as right, as it had the first time. "Last night," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "Kissing you. It felt like I'd finally found my true north. It felt like I was home." My throat was tight with emotion. All the words I wanted to say, all the years of loneliness and yearning, were caught in my chest. He had put into words everything I had been feeling but had been too afraid to acknowledge. He had seen me, really seen me, in a way no one else ever had. I squeezed his hand, unable to speak. He seemed to understand. He lifted our joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. "I know this is all new," he said gently, "and I'm probably clumsy as hell at this. But I want to try. I want to figure this out. With you. If that's something you want too." The hope in his eyes was so open, so vulnerable, it broke through the last of my defenses. The fear was still there, a faint whisper in the back of my mind, but it was drowned out by a much louder, much more powerful feeling. A feeling of profound, terrifying, wonderful hope. "Yes," I said, the word coming out on a shaky breath. "Liam, yes. I want that." The smile that broke across his face was like the sunrise. It lit up his entire being, and it lit up the dark, quiet corners of my world. He stepped in, closing the final inch between us, and wrapped his free arm around my waist, pulling me against him. I rested my head on his shoulder, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against my cheek. My own apartment, which had so often felt like a cage, suddenly felt like a sanctuary. With him in it, it felt like a home. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other, the coffee forgotten on the counter. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic confessions of undying love. It was something quieter, something better. It was a mutual agreement, a conscious choice, a quiet promise to start drawing a new map, together. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't afraid of getting lost. I felt, quite simply, like I had been found. Our new beginning was not a sudden, dramatic shift, but a series of quiet, deliberate moments. It was Liam knocking on my door in the morning with 2 cups of coffee, a ritual that quickly became our own. It was me, crossing the lawn in the evening, no longer an observer but a participant, to help him with some small task in his endless renovation, sanding a piece of trim, holding a board steady, offering an opinion on the perfect shade of blue for the bathroom. These tasks were excuses, of course. They were reasons to be near each other, to inhabit the same space, to learn the rhythm of each other's movements. We talked. We talked for hours, sitting on his porch as the sun went down, the ever-present Buster snoozing at our feet. He told me about growing up in a small town, about his fractured relationship with his father, about his dream of one day building a house from the ground up with his own hands. I, in turn, found myself opening up in ways I never had before. I told him about my quiet, bookish childhood, about the series of failed, half-hearted relationships that had led me to embrace solitude, about the secret fear that I was destined to be a spectator in my own life. He was a phenomenal listener. He never pushed, never judged. He would just watch me, his hazel eyes attentive, and when I was finished, he would reach out and take my hand, a simple, solid gesture of reassurance that said more than words ever could. With him, my carefully constructed walls, built over years of self-preservation, began to crumble. Not because he tore them down, but because he made me feel safe enough to lower them myself, brick by brick. Intimacy wasn't just in the deep conversations or the searing kisses we shared in the quiet of our homes. It was in the small things. It was in the way he started buying the brand of dark roast coffee I liked. It was in the way I learned to anticipate when he'd need a specific tool, handing it to him before he even had to ask. It was in the comfortable silences that could stretch between us, no longer awkward or empty, but full of a quiet, shared understanding. One Saturday, We were working in his bathroom, a disaster zone of exposed pipes and crumbling plaster. We were attempting to tile the shower, a task for which neither of us was remotely qualified. Mortar was everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, in our hair. I had a smudge of it on my nose, and Liam, trying to wipe it off, only succeeded in smearing it across my cheek. I looked at him, at the matching smudge on his own forehead, and I started to laugh. It was a real, uninhibited laugh, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. He looked at me, surprised at first, and then his own face broke into a wide grin. His laughter joined mine, echoing in the small, dusty room. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, of shared, ridiculous humanity. In that moment, covered in tile adhesive and laughing so hard I could barely stand, I felt a profound sense of peace. The constant hum of anxiety that had been the background music of my life for so long had faded to silence. The overthinking, the second-guessing, the fear, it was all gone. All that was left was this man, this moment, this feeling of rightness. He reached out and gently wiped the mortar from my cheek with his thumb, his smile softening. His touch was no longer hesitant or uncertain. It was confident, familiar. "You have a great laugh," he said quietly, his eyes searching mine. "You should use it more often." "I'll work on it," I promised, my own smile unwavering. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of dust and coffee and contentment. It wasn't a kiss of desperate discovery anymore. It was a kiss of comfortable familiarity, a kiss that felt like coming home. Life settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. Our two separate worlds, his of chaotic creation and mine of quiet observation, began to merge. My books started appearing on his shelves. His stray tools found a home in my junk drawer. We would cook dinner together, sometimes at his place, sometimes at mine, the two kitchens becoming interchangeable. We walked Buster together every evening, our hands naturally finding each other, our fingers lacing together as if they had been designed for that very purpose. Our neighbors, including the formidable Mrs. Henderson, undoubtedly noticed. I would catch her watching us from her window, a curious but not unkind expression on her face. One afternoon, as we were returning from a walk, she was out tending to her petunias. "Your lawn is looking much better, Alex," she said, her voice sharp but not unfriendly. "Liam's been helping me with it," I said, feeling his hand tighten reassuringly in mine. She looked from me to Liam, then down at our joined hands, and then back up at my face. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Yes," she said, a world of meaning in the single word. "I can see that." And then she turned back to her flowers, the matter settled. There was no judgment, no gossip, just a quiet acceptance. It seemed the world was far less scary than I had built it up to be in my head. A few months after that first walk, on a crisp autumn evening, Liam and I were sitting on his newly finished deck. The barbecue pit he'd built was roaring, casting a warm, flickering light on our faces. Buster was asleep, his head resting on my foot. I was leaning against Liam's side, his arm wrapped securely around my shoulders, a half-empty beer bottle cool in my hand. We were watching the stars begin to appear in the deep purple sky, not talking, just being. The silence was perfect. It was the silence I had always craved, but it wasn't empty. It was full of his presence, of our shared history, of the quiet promise of a future. I thought back to the man I had been just a few short months ago, the lonely ghost watching a life from his window. It felt like a lifetime away. I had been so convinced that my life was meant to be lived on the sidelines, that love and connection were things that happened to other people, people like Liam. I had never imagined that the person I was watching was also, in his own way, watching me back, waiting for a reason to cross the lawn. Liam shifted, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. It was the same question he had asked me that first night in his kitchen, the question that had started everything. I tilted my head back to look at him, at his strong, kind face illuminated by the firelight. The love I felt for him was a quiet, steady thing, a warm ember in the center of my chest. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow burn that had been building all along. "I was just thinking," I said, a smile spreading across my face, "about how a loose dog can change everything." He smiled back, his eyes full of a deep, unwavering affection that still, after all this time, took my breath away. He tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer. "Best damn thing that ever happened to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And as I settled back against his chest, listening to the crackle of the fire and the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear, I knew he was right. I was no longer a spectator. I was here. I was a part of this. And I was finally, truly home.